"Read it out loud," Ron said across the Christmas table, pushing a bright white envelope against my plate like he was delivering bad news, not a gift. Loud Aubrey. "Use a clear voice for once. You always choke when numbers get big." Phones were already pointed at me. A cousin whispered not quietly, "This should be good. She shakes just paying for groceries." Patty rested her chin on her manicured hand and smiled at the guests, first, then at me. "Sweetheart, breathe. You do not get many moments where people actually look at you." A couple of aunts laughed. Someone clapped. I had not opened the envelope yet, and already the room felt like a small stage where I had been dragged by the collar. Ron tapped his spoon on a glass like a master of ceremonies. "Come on our paper, princess. Show us the magic number. Maybe if you read a big check, the universe will give you a real job." I slid my hand over the envelope, not because I was nervous, but because I did not trust the smile stretching across his face. I opened the flap, and the check inside nearly stole my breath. My name. His signature. A number I had never seen next to my own life, $3 million. The room leaned forward. Ron tilted his phone higher. Read it, or at least pretend. "We want content for the family newsletter." Patty let out a soft theatrical sigh. "Be grateful, honey. No one ever gives you anything. Not even life." My chest tightened, but my voice stayed level. "Why do you need me to perform?" The table froze. The quiet lasted one heartbeat too long. Then Ron covered it with a laugh sharp enough to cut glass. "Because the bank will laugh harder than we are. Say the number, try to deposit it tomorrow and watch the teller grin at you. It will be adorable." Another cousin said, "Frame it next to her student loan bills." Someone else added, $3 million is more than she will ever see unless she marries it." Patty reached for my wrist, tried to angle the envelope toward her camera. "Smile. Everyone is watching. People are finally paying attention to you." She said it sweetly like a blessing, but her eyes held something else. Ron sent me a Venmo request for $50, announced it as a production fee, and held his phone up so the table could see. Laughter rolled across the room like heat. My cheeks burned, but not for the reasons they thought. I folded the check and placed it back in the envelope. Ron scoffed. "Look at that. Even fake money scares her." Patty leaned closer and whispered, "Do not ruin Christmas again. Every year it is something with you. Just read it and let them clap." Her voice was soft enough to sound kind, quiet enough to wound. I thought of my grandfather Edwin in his workshop with cedar dust in his hair, telling me that respect is not loud. I looked at Ron and Patty and said, "I do not perform for money." That sentence landed like a crack in a window. Not loud, but final. Ron shook his head and announced to the table, "There it is, the attitude. If you want to be treated like family, you have to act like family. We carry the bills, the shop, the house, and her mistakes." Patty nodded like a judge delivering a sentence. She never learned gratitude. Even as a child, she cried when she did not get attention. Nothing changes. It was such a practiced line that part of me wondered how many times she had said it behind closed doors. Ron lifted his glass. To the first time Aubrey ever held something worth more than a coupon. Laughter returned smaller and meaner. I pushed my chair back, walked to my coat, and tucked the envelope deep inside the inner pocket. My phone vibrated. A soft alert, almost polite. I pulled it out and saw an email from the bank with the subject line "Deposit Limits Update." For a second, the world narrowed to those 3 words. Patty's voice floated from the table, telling everyone that I was dramatic and sensitive, and always took things the wrong way. Someone joked that I probably thought Grandpa was sending me a secret message from heaven. Ron shouted across the room, "Tomorrow go to the bank and hand them that check. Film their reaction. It will be the best Christmas laugh we have had in years." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I did not smile. I returned to the table and sat down like nothing had happened. But something had. Everyone else kept eating and laughing and telling stories about me as if I were not there. Ron leaned back and declared that big numbers were for people who understood real life, not for dreamers who lived in tiny apartments with mismatched furniture. Patty dabbed her lips and said she hoped I would not post anything embarrassing online because the family had a reputation to protect. I watched them play their parts and thought of my grandfather's handwriting on the check firm and deliberate. I thought of how he never raised his voice and never asked who was watching when he gave anything. At the far end of the table, the framed photo of him seemed to look past everyone, steady and calm, as if he knew something the rest of them did not. My phone vibrated again. Another message. I did not need to read it to know. The bank was not laughing. The bank was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel small. I drove back to Lakewood that night with the snow falling in slow, tired circles, the kind of snow that does not care about holidays or families or laughter that sounds like glass. The streetlights made thin halos on the pavement, and every house glowed with Christmas lights, warm on the outside and cold behind the doors. My apartment was quiet, small, and honest. I hung my coat on the chair, felt the weight of the envelope against the fabric, and set it on the table without opening it. My phone buzzed. Patty had sent a text wrapped in sugar. "Do not embarrass me again." Then a winking emoji as if adding a joke made the sentence gentle. Before I could type a response, Ron dropped a meme in the family group chat. A cartoon check that said, "I owe you $3 million. Under it, he typed, "Aubrey can frame this when she finally gets a job with benefits." The reactions rolled in, laughing faces, thumbs up. One cousin wrote, "This is hilarious." Another said, "Best Christmas joke so far." Not one message asked if I was all right. I set the phone face down and walked to the window. Lake Erie was hidden in the dark, but I could smell its winter breath through the old panes. I stared at the street and thought about Grandpa Edwin sitting at his workbench, sanding a walnut board, telling me that silence is not weakness. Silence is a choice. I went back to the table and picked up the envelope again. The paper was thick, not flimsy. His handwriting was steady. He never joked with his signature. Still, I needed proof that no one could twist. My laptop hummed awake. I opened the banking app and used the mobile deposit feature to take a clean picture. The check sat on the screen like a dare. I submitted it. The app spun, then moved the check into a review queue. A small note appeared. "Review priority applied." I stared at those words. I knew what priority meant in banking language. Trust money moved faster than jokes. I did not smile. I powered down the laptop and went to the kitchen. The heater rattled like it was arguing with the cold. While I waited for water to boil, I saw the box on the top shelf of my pantry, a small wooden box with brass corners. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside were things I kept because no one else cared about their weight. A photo of Grandpa and me at the county fair, a receipt from my first paid design job, a birthday card written in his handwriting. On the bottom, folded under everything else, lay a printout from years ago, the record of my college fund, the balance that should have covered 2 years of tuition, the fund that disappeared when Ron said the garage had an emergency and they needed a family loan. They promised it would be paid back in 6 months. It had been 8 years. I remembered sitting at this same table when I was 19, Patty patting my hand and telling me to grow up because real life does not wait for permission. They called it borrowing. They called it family. But they paid for new tires on Ron's truck and a custom neon sign for the shop and a vacation to Florida. They never paid the fund back. My phone buzzed again. Another message in the family chat. Ron had edited a photo of himself holding a giant fake check and tagged me. It said, "Thanks for the laugh." I shut the phone off. I opened my laptop once more and went to the website for the major credit bureaus. In less than 15 minutes, I placed a freeze on my credit at all 3. It was a legal shift of power. Quiet, clean. They used my credit history for the shop once before when Ron needed a short-term line and did not want his own score checked. Never again. When the last confirmation email arrived, I took out my wallet and pulled up my credit card account. Months ago, Ron asked to be added as an authorized user so the shop could earn rewards on bigger purchases. He said it would help build points for family trips. I did it because I wanted peace. Peace had become too expensive. I removed his access with a single click. The screen asked if I was sure. I pressed yes. Somewhere in Lakewood, a little thread of his financial world snapped quietly. Then I shut the laptop for good. It was nearly 2 a.m. The snow kept falling. I washed my face and turned off the lights, but sleep did not come. I felt like someone had rearranged the air in my apartment. Not lighter, just real. When sunlight finally came, it was thin and gray. My phone powered back on with a buzz. A new message from the bank. Thank you for your submission. Your deposit is currently under review. A second line mentioned the trust account by name. Funds will be available upon validation. I stared at the words until they blurred, not because I doubted them, but because they were quiet and solid and absolutely real. I made coffee and sat by the window. Snow piled on the street. A car door slammed outside and someone called for their dog. Life continued. My phone pinged again, not from the bank this time. Ron had added a new message to the group chat. Everyone give a warm round of applause for our comedy queen. She thought the check was real. Patty added a line. Be gentle. She is sensitive. A cousin replied with crying, laughing emojis. I let the phone buzz until the battery died. I dressed, packed my bag, and stepped outside. The cold bit at my face, but it felt cleaner than the warmth of that dining room. I walked to a small coffee shop near the lake. The barista knew me by name. She asked how family dinner went. Fine, I said. Predictable. I sat near the window and opened my laptop again. The check image sat in the processing queue. No warnings, no jokes, just a clear line pending review. I took a sip of hot coffee and felt the heat spread down my chest. My future had been borrowed once and called love. This time I would keep every receipt. Ever had your future borrowed and called family? Say I remember. On Christmas morning, I walked to the Edgewater coffee shop by the lake. The wind came off the water like a warning, and the sky was pale enough to feel hollow. Inside the shop, everything smelled like espresso and cinnamon. People in heavy coats waited for lattes and pastries. No one cared about checks or family jokes or humiliation. I ordered a black coffee and took the corner seat near the window where I could see the frozen shoreline. My phone turned back on after an hour of charging, and the familiar buzz filled the quiet table. Notifications flooded the screen. Ron had posted a story with a picture of a paper crown on a napkin and the caption, 3 million paper princess. He tagged me. A few relatives reacted with laughing emojis. One aunt wrote, she should frame that check and hang it next to her high school participation awards. Another cousin added, do banks have a joke bin, or do they just shred dreams the same day? Patty sent a smiling selfie with her holiday outfit and wrote, be kind to Aubrey. She takes everything seriously. The kind of kindness that is not kindness at all. I set the phone down and wrapped my hands around the warm cup. The snow along the sidewalk looked clean and untouched. I told myself to breathe. I had walked away from their house. I had my own keys, my own life, and my own conscience. Then my phone rang with a number from Huntington Bank. I answered. A calm voice introduced herself as Lydia Chen from the trust side of the branch in Shaker Square. She asked to verify my identity with security questions. My birthday, my old address, my mother's maiden name. Then she said something that made me sit straighter. Your deposit has cleared pending trust validation. Funds will be available on our end once the standard hold completes. I closed my eyes. I could hear cappuccino foam steaming behind the counter and the low hum of conversation around me. I asked if she was sure. She repeated the line and added that the check came from a protected account, which meant the bank gave it priority review. I thanked her. Not with loud excitement, with quiet relief that felt like a stone had been lifted off my chest. After we ended the call, I sat still for a long time. The check was not a joke. My grandfather meant every digit. The man who taught me how to build a table with patience had given me something that did not need applause. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Patty. The words came fast and frantic. Are you talking to the bank? Why are they saying the payment on our checks has been stopped? What did you say to them? It took a moment for me to understand. Ron and Patty had deposited their own envelopes. The bank had held them, but mine had cleared. My fingers shook for the first time in 2 days, not with fear, but with something sharper. I typed back, "I did not speak to anyone about your checks. Maybe ask the bank." Patty replied, "Do not play innocent. You have always wanted to make us look bad. My sister says Grandpa was slipping these past few years, and you took advantage of him." I did not answer. Instead, I opened the banking app and checked the status again. The review mark had moved from pending to cleared. Just one word, cleared. I placed the phone on the table and stared at the lake. The morning light bounced off the ice in thin silver flashes. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the truth did not need to scream. Around 10, a message popped up from Ron. "We need to talk. Bring the check to the garage this afternoon." I dialed the bank number again and asked to speak with Lydia. When she returned to the line, I requested a sub-trust, a separate protected account that only I could access. She asked if this was for safety. I said yes. She asked if anyone else needed authorization. I said no. She processed the request and told me it would take effect before end of day. No one would be able to touch the funds or claim involvement. No signatures from family members. No verbal permissions. No emergency transfers. The trust was mine and mine alone. When the call ended, I felt something settle inside me, a kind of spine. I walked to the counter, ordered a second coffee, and sat back down. Snow dripped off the windows. Children dragged sleds across the sidewalk. Life did not wait for permission. Then another message appeared from Patty. The tone had shifted from angry to nervous. "I called the bank. They said the payment on our checks was stopped. How did yours clear? Did you forge something? Answer me." I stared at the screen. These were the same people who mocked me less than 24 hours earlier. The same people who asked me to perform like a dancing animal in front of extended family. Now they were scrambling for answers. I typed, "The bank cleared mine. You should speak with them about yours." Patty sent 5 more messages in a row. "Do not be smug. Do not act like you are above us." Grandpa was confused. He probably wrote the wrong name. The bank made a mistake. We all need to stay calm. Ron followed with a single sentence, "Bring the check." I ignored both. Instead, I stared at the cold lake and let the steam from my coffee cloud the window. The weight of the moment did not come from revenge. It came from the silence of knowing the power had shifted without a single cruel word from me. A group of teenagers passed outside laughing and throwing snow. A dog ran behind them, barking happily. It all felt strangely normal for a morning that had rearranged the family pecking order. My phone buzzed once more. This time it was an alert from the bank confirming the creation of the sub-trust. The account stood alone like a locked door with my hand on the only key. No third-party authorization. No one could talk their way around it. I felt a calm I had not felt in years. I had always been the quiet one, the easy one, the one who stayed polite to keep peace. But peace kept at the expense of dignity is not peace at all. Noon passed. My coffee cooled. I could have gone home, but I stayed. The quiet of the shop felt like safety. Ron sent a final message in the group chat. "You think you won? We will see." I did not reply. I packed my laptop and stepped back into the cold. The lake wind rushed at my face. The check had cleared. Their checks had not. The world did not shout it. But the world knew. If a single phone call ever flipped the power in your house, say cleared. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a strange quiet, the kind that feels heavy, even in an empty room. Lakewood streets were still lined with lights, but the world outside my window seemed thin and tired. I heated soup I did not taste and tried to read a book I could not follow. When night settled, in my phone, lit up with a string of messages from Patty. The first was a picture of her face streaked with mascara, taken in the living room where the tree glowed behind her. "You made your mother look foolish. I hope you are happy." Another photo came seconds later, her lips pulled into a trembling frown. Everyone at dinner asked what was wrong with you. They said you acted ungrateful. They think I raised a selfish daughter." She added a final message. "You have embarrassed me enough for one lifetime." I set the phone down. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how Patty could cry in front of cameras, but never shed a real tear in front of me. A few minutes later, a message from Ron arrived. It was short and sharp. "Bring that check to the garage tomorrow. We need to fix our cash flow. You wanted to be useful. Now you can be." The words tasted bitter like metal on my tongue. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask if I made it home safely. He did not ask if the holiday hurt. Only money. Only need. The next morning, I woke before dawn and pulled the wooden box from my pantry shelf again. The house was quiet. Snow tapped softly against the window. I set the box on the kitchen table and lifted the lid. Under the birthday card and the photograph and the first invoice from my design work lay a stack of papers I had not touched in years. At the top was the printout of my college fund. Beneath it lay another sheet with Patty's signature and a date. The day the account balance dropped to 0. She wrote temporary loan for garage expenses, to be replaced in 6 months. 8 years had passed. They bought new tools, new tires, a trip to Florida, a neon sign shaped like a wrench that cost more than my rent. The money never returned. I unfolded a series of emails, one from Patty. "We will pay it back as soon as the shop stabilizes." Another from Ron. "You have to trust family. We are all building something together." I remembered that night. I was 19 and scared and hopeful. I wanted to believe them. I did believe them. But belief is only useful when the other person earns it. Now I had proof in black ink. Proof that did not care about excuses or laughter or staged apologies. I took pictures of every document. I scanned them into my laptop and made a folder labeled Receipts. As I worked, my phone buzzed again. Patty had sent a long message about forgiveness and loyalty and family. She wrote that Grandpa would be ashamed of me. She wrote that I had ruined Christmas. She wrote that if the check cleared, I should turn the money over for the good of the shop. I did not reply. I opened the website for the Better Business Bureau and began a complaint. I typed clearly. I explained that my education fund had been withdrawn without repayment in violation of the agreement. I attached the printout, Patty's signature, and the emails. I checked every detail twice, then submitted it. Next, I opened the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Complaint Portal. It was not dramatic. It did not require raised voices or accusations, just facts. They borrowed funds meant for my schooling. They promised to return them. They never did. I attached the same documents. I wrote nothing cruel, only the truth, which sometimes lands harder than any insult. When I pressed submit, my body felt lighter. Not triumphant, just honest. It was nearly midday when my phone rang. Not a call, but a text from an unfamiliar number. It was my Aunt Sandra. She wrote, "I heard what happened at dinner. I am not proud of what they did to you. If anyone needs to speak with me about that night, I will tell the truth." I read the message twice. Aunt Sandra had always been quiet, the kind of woman who stayed out of conflict. Her offer meant more than she knew. A moment later, another text arrived. This one from a neighbor named Mr. Ritter, who lived 2 houses down from Patty. Years ago, he worked as a banker in downtown Cleveland. He had been at the Christmas dinner as a friend of an uncle. He wrote 3 words that landed like a stone dropping into a still pond. I heard enough, nothing more. No lectures, no pity, just enough. I saved both messages. I placed them in the folder with the rest of the receipts. The next hours passed slowly. The coffee cooled. The sun sank behind the gray line of houses. I did not call Ron. I did not drive to the garage. I did not perform. As evening settled in, snow covered the sidewalks again. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the lights flicker on the Christmas tree in the apartment across the courtyard. Families opened gifts somewhere. Children laughed. Life went on without my participation. My phone stayed silent. The documents on my laptop glowed like proof of something I had always known but never spoken. That night I slept deeply, without dreams, without fear, without the weight of apology pressed against my ribs. When morning came, I made coffee and carried my laptop to the table. The folder, marked Receipts, waited on the screen. There was no satisfaction in hurting them. That was not my goal. The truth did not need to wound. It only needed to stand. If you learn to keep receipts, say receipts. On the morning of December 26, I drove to Shaker Heights, where the law office of Melissa Grant sat in a converted brick house with white trim and a wreath on the door. The air smelled like cold and salt from the street, and my footsteps sounded too loud on the icy path. Inside the waiting room, a small tree twinkled with gold lights, and the receptionist offered tea while I waited. My phone buzzed again and again in my coat pocket. I did not look at it. When Melissa called my name, I followed her into a quiet office lined with thick books and framed certificates. She closed the door and asked if I was all right. I told her I was tired. She nodded the way someone nods when they know a story long before it is spoken. Then I handed her the check. She studied it under the lamp, tilted it to catch the watermark, and traced her finger along my grandfather's signature. Her voice softened. I remember him. He was generous, but not foolish. If he signed this, he meant it. She opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder marked Whitman Trust. She explained that the trust had been updated several times over the years. Then she flipped to a thin section near the back and slid a stapled paper across the desk toward me. It was titled Behavior Clause. I read the first lines. In the event a gift is mocked, belittled, or publicly dismissed by the intended recipient, said gift may be held for review. In such cases, the bank has authority to stop payment until respect is restored. My eyes moved to the next paragraph. Any attempt to coerce another family member into surrendering their gift will be grounds for permanent suspension. All payment decisions will defer to witness testimony. I looked up at Melissa. My voice came out low. Grandpa wrote this. She nodded. It was his idea. He had seen enough over the years. He wanted respect to have weight. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, a hard, insistent vibration. I ignored it and kept reading. The clause spelled out authority to the bank, to the trust officer, and to whoever held the gift with dignity. It was quiet justice written in legal ink. Melissa asked if I had faced any pressure so far. I told her about the dinner, the demands to read the number aloud, the jokes, the humiliation. I told her about the texts asking for the check for the money for the favor. As I spoke, the phone filled the silence with more buzzing. Finally, I pulled it out. 10 missed calls from Patty, 4 from Ron, a voicemail notification. I pressed play on speaker. Patty's voice filled the office, breathless and angry. Your grandfather was confused. You should not be cashing anything. He must have been failing. The bank will laugh at you, and so will the judge. Her voice cracked. You are making this into drama because you like attention. You always did. Then softer. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone. You should be ashamed. The message ended. Silence settled between Melissa and me. She reached for another document. The clause also allowed something I had not expected. The bank could verify the clause directly without family approval if the recipient signed a limited authorization. With that signature, any dispute would be answered by truth, not by shouting. She placed the authorization in front of me. If you feel unsafe, she said, or if they pressure you to surrender the check, this protects you. I signed my name with a hand that did not shake. The pen felt heavier than it should have, like writing the truth carried weight. When the ink dried, she made a copy for the bank and handed me the original. My phone buzzed again. I clicked silent and pushed it to the far side of the desk. Enough noise. Enough performances. Melissa leaned back in her chair. There is one more thing, she said. Your aunt came by this morning. She left something. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather watch. The strap was worn smooth from years of use. It had been Grandpa's. I touched the face of it. The glass was scratched, but the hands still ticked. Melissa pressed a thin button on the side. The back popped open. Inside was a tiny flash drive taped gently in place. My breath caught. Melissa slid it into her laptop and opened the only file on it, a 5-minute video. My grandfather sat at his workbench, wood dust on his sleeves, sunlight coming through the window behind him. His voice was steady. "If you are watching this, it means the bank asked for clarification." He smiled, not sad, not angry, just patient. I wanted gifts to mean something. Money is a tool, not applause. He looked into the camera as if he could see whoever sat in front of the screen. Respect is a quiet thing. It is never loud. It does not mock. It does not take. He paused and folded his hands. If my generosity becomes a joke, then the joke is not on me. It is on those who have forgotten where they came from. I trust the one who kept the envelope safe. I trust the one who did not laugh. I know who is real. His last words landed like stone in still water, not harsh, final. As the video ended, Melissa closed the laptop. My throat felt tight, not from sorrow, but from clarity. Every lie, every joke, every demand seemed suddenly small. The phone vibrated again, this time a text from Ron. "Stop ignoring us. Bring the check. The garage needs help." I powered the phone off completely. Melissa asked what I wanted to do next. I told her I wanted nothing loud, nothing cruel, just truth. She nodded and said that was often more powerful than shouting. She forwarded the authorization and a summary of the clause to the bank. As she pressed send, I felt something shift. Power moving quietly across invisible lines. Outside, snow drifted past the window. I gathered my coat and tucked the watch into my pocket. The leather felt warm against my hand. As I stepped out onto the cold porch, the wind carried the faint smell of pine from a nearby yard. I looked up at the pale winter sky and felt no need to answer any of the calls or messages waiting in the dark screen of my phone. I did not need to defend myself. Grandpa had already written my defense in his own voice. If a will ever felt like a mirror, say mirror. On December 27, Ron sent a group text that read, "Mandatory family meeting at Mercer Auto and Body at 6. No excuses." The words sounded like a command, not an invitation. I drove there slowly through slush and gray air. The garage looked the same as it always had, a wide metal building with a faded sign and a line of cars waiting for repairs. Inside the shop, the concrete floor gleamed with oil and cold light. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead. A few employees stood near the back, pretending to organize tools while really watching us. Patty paced with her arms crossed. Ron dragged a folding table into the middle of the garage and set 2 papers on top. The room smelled of gasoline and metal and old rags. When I stepped inside, Ron's voice echoed across the space. "Sit. We need order." I did not sit. I stayed standing. Patty looked at me with eyes that tried to be soft but still hardened around the edges. She said, "You hurt us. The family is in crisis. The whole town is talking about you." Ron pointed to the papers. "These are contribution agreements. Signing means you give a percentage of the check to the garage to protect the jobs of 14 workers who have families. If you refuse, they lose hours or we shut down." He slid the papers toward me. The word contribution felt like a sweet coating on a bitter demand. I read the first page. It said nothing about protecting workers. It said the signatory agrees to forward funds on demand for business operations and emergencies. No repayment terms, no limits, no safeguards. Ron pushed. "You can save us," he said. "Do not be selfish. Grandpa gave you that money because you were part of something bigger. You owe this." The employees stood still at the back. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt too tight to breathe. I asked him one question. "Why are you behind on payments?" Ron's jaw clenched. He said we had a slow season. Patty said a supplier messed up deliveries. When people lie, they look everywhere except your eyes. I walked to the small office in the corner of the shop, the one where Ron kept invoices stacked in messy piles. I opened the desk drawer. The bills were there. Past due notices, supplier statements, red stamps, Patty yelled from the garage floor. "You are invading our privacy." Ron stormed after me and tried to pull the papers from my hands. I held them tighter. The room suddenly grew small. I said softly, "You do not want help, you want control." Ron's face turned the color of anger. He shouted that I was ungrateful, that I had everything because he married my mother, that I owed him every success. His voice boomed against metal walls. The employees stared at the floor. I put the papers back in the drawer and walked toward the exit. Ron blocked the path. "Sign the agreement and this ends. You will not make fools of us in a courtroom." Patty added, "If you love this family, you will prove it right here." I stepped around them and walked out. Outside, the air tasted like ice and freedom. I sat in my car and breathed. Then I remembered something. The family phone plan was in my name. Years ago, Ron asked me to add a business line to help him call suppliers after hours. I never removed it. Now it gave him leverage, or so he thought. Sitting in the car, I logged into the carrier account and removed his line. No more late-night bargaining calls, no more emergency demands. One click, then another. The phone screen flashed changes saved. I drove home as snow fell in long, slow streaks. The next morning, my email chimed with a message from a supplier. It had been forwarded accidentally from the garage account. It read, "Due to a BBB complaint and concerns about credit risk, we will only accept cash on delivery for all future orders. No credit terms available. Payment required at drop-off." My quiet complaint had reached them. Without cash flow, the garage could not buy parts on credit. Every repair would require cash up front. I stared at the screen. Ron had created the crisis, not me. Actions have echoes. The phone rang. Patty again. Her voice was brittle. "The supplier canceled our credit. Did you say something? Did you call someone?" I said no. I filed truth. Maybe truth travels faster than lies. She breathed hard, a sound like panic. "This is your fault. We cannot function like this. People will lose jobs." I asked why the employees should pay for her decisions. She hung up. For 2 days, my phone buzzed with messages. Ron saying, "Fix this." Patty saying, "Come back." A cousin saying the family would never forgive me if the business closed. Each word blamed me for a debt I did not create. I watched the messages arrive and felt nothing break inside me. I made tea. I walked along the frozen lake. I slept without fear. The world outside the apartment felt quiet and white. On the night of December 28, I drove past the garage. The lights were off. Snow covered the parking lot. A stack of parts deliveries sat untouched by the door. No one had paid cash. No one had signed anything. The next morning, Ron sent one more message. "You ruined everything with your selfishness. You could have saved us." I typed a single sentence. "I am not your bank." I turned the phone face down and let the silence do the rest. If family became leverage against you, comment "not anymore." On December 29, Patty hosted what she called a family brunch, but the moment I stepped into the house, I knew it was an ambush, shaped like hospitality. The living room was packed coats on chairs, mugs of cocoa and shaking hands, eyes flicking toward me and away again. The Christmas tree lights blinked in slow, tired colors. Ron stood in the center of the room like a man preparing for a performance. Patty's voice cut through the hum of small talk. "Aubrey has something to say." The room fell quiet. A cousin set down her fork. An uncle leaned back as if settling in for entertainment. Ron lifted his chin and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You embarrassed this family. You humiliated your mother. Now you will apologize in front of the people you hurt." I looked at Patty. Her eyes were red from crying or pretending to cry. The two often looked the same on her. She whispered, "Say sorry, honey. Make this right." The humiliation sat heavy in the air. A room full of relatives waited to watch me kneel. Ron added, "Say you misunderstood the check and that we had no bad intentions." My heart beat steady in my chest. I did not move. I said quietly, "You want a performance, but I do not perform for money or appearances." Ron's voice rose. "If you do not apologize now, every person here will know what you are." He gestured toward the rug as if this living room were a courtroom, as if his word were law. For a moment, the weight of every childhood memory tried to press me small again. Every Christmas where I smiled to keep peace. Every dinner where the jokes had sharp edges and I swallowed hurt so the night would not explode. But that part of me had died in the garage. I walked across the room to the television. Ron barked, "What are you doing?" Patty said, "Sit down." I ignored both. I plugged the USB into the back of the TV. The screen flickered on. Voices fell silent. My grandfather appeared on the screen, sitting in his workshop, the old leather strap of the clock visible behind him. He spoke slowly, every word clear. Respect is not a game. It is the only wealth that stays when money leaves. If a person laughs at a gift, they laugh at the hands that built it. His voice filled the room like a sermon. Patty gasped. Ron stepped forward and clicked the remote wildly, but I had locked the input. The video continued. "When I am gone, the trust will speak for me. Behavior matters. Humiliation has a cost." The room froze. Some relatives looked at the floor. Others stared at the screen like watching a ghost tell secrets. When the video ended, I pressed play again on a second file, the one from the lawyer's office. Lydia Chen's voice came from a speakerphone. "Per trust terms and confirmed by witnesses, stop payment applies to any beneficiary who publicly mocks a Christmas gift. The bank has acted accordingly." Ron's face drained. Patty trembled. Mr. Ritter, who had been sitting quietly near the back, stood up and cleared his throat. I was there. I heard every word in the dining room. Ron tried to laugh. A choked sound came out instead. He said, "This is manipulation." He said, "This is a stunt." I walked back to the coffee table and set a small envelope down in front of him. Inside were the receipts of my education fund, withdrawals signed by Patty 8 years earlier, and an email promising it would be returned in 6 months. I read aloud, 6 months. I waited 8 years. The room held its breath. Patty whispered that was different. We needed help. We always planned to pay you back. Ron shouted that the video had been edited and the bank was confused and Mr. Ritter was lying. Words flooded out of him in broken pieces. But lies are loud. The truth did not need to raise its voice. I said calmly, "Respect is currency." My grandfather said that. He believed it. He lived it. Ron slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! This is a family. You do not expose your own." I replied, "You did that when you made me the punchline." Silence grew like a storm. In that silence, footsteps echoed from the hallway. It was Aunt Leona, the quiet one who rarely spoke at gatherings. She said with a steady tone, "I was there too." The laughter was cruel. The check was not a joke. "Now I know who is real." Her words traveled through the room like a verdict. Someone set down a glass softly. Someone else exhaled. The silence cut deeper than shouting ever could. Patty covered her face with a napkin. Ron's shoulders slumped. The performance had collapsed. In the stillness, I felt something shift. No fireworks, no screaming, just truth sitting heavily in the center of the room. I stood and said, "You asked for a public apology. Here is one. I apologize to myself for needing your approval for so many years. I will not need it again." Then I walked toward the door. A cousin whispered, "Do not go," but the room was already behind me. Outside, the snow fell in soft flakes, gentle and indifferent. I opened my car door. The world felt different, lighter, cleaner. Inside the house, voices rose in argument and accusation. The show had turned inward. I drove away without turning on the radio. My hands did not shake. I did not doubt myself. I had not taken revenge. I had shown truth, and truth had done the rest. If truth ever spoke louder, then you could type truth. On December 30, I sat in the quiet lobby of Huntington Trust, the windows fogged from the cold outside, the polished floor reflecting winter light. Melissa met me with a folder under her arm and a look that mixed sympathy with certainty. We went into a small conference room where the table smelled faintly of lemon oil. She slid a stack of papers toward me, each page stamped with the trust seal. The first showed a simple line of numbers. Stop payment confirmed for Ronald Mercer and Patricia Mercer. Status permanent review. Next line, deposit cleared for Aubrey Lane. Status protected. My heart did not race the way it once would have. I only felt a slow, steady calm spreading through my chest. Melissa explained that the bank had created a sub-trust to safeguard the assets. Income distribution only, no lump sums, allowed no third-party authorizations, no advances, no emergency withdrawals for anyone who had mocked or diminished the gift given by my grandfather. Her voice was even. This protects you from pressure or manipulation. I nodded. She added softly, it also protects the trust from abusers. The word hung in the air. It was not angry, only accurate. Money did not create character. It only revealed it. We reviewed tax forms, beneficiary statements, identity confirmations, and security settings. When everything was in place, Melissa leaned back in her chair. She said almost all of this was planned long before Christmas. The check was only the moment where you learned who stood with you. The rest was the legacy he designed. I left the bank and drove toward the garage. The snow was falling again in thin white threads. Mercer Auto and Body was half-lit one overhead lamp, flickering in the office window. When I walked near the parking lot, I saw 2 envelopes taped to the door, one from the supplier printed in bold type. Due to outstanding invoices, we will only accept cash on delivery for all remaining orders. Another was from the IRS, a notice reminding them of an overdue quarterly filing. I did not need to open it to know that the pressure was mounting. Actions have echoes even when the person who caused them pretends to be innocent. I got back in my car and sat for a moment. The silence felt like winter air, sharp but real. That afternoon, I met Melissa again, this time in her office downtown. She wore glasses and moved with practiced efficiency. She helped me complete the application for a small claims action to recover the education funds that Patty and Ron had taken 8 years earlier. The complaint was simple, factual, and supported with receipts and emails. We asked for the amount withdrawn plus minimal interest allowed under Ohio law. Nothing dramatic, nothing cruel, just accountability. I signed it, placed it in an envelope, and sent it. I did not tell my family. Quiet justice has a way of speaking without shouting. The next morning, I checked my email. There was a notice from the court stating that the claim had been accepted and a letter would be mailed to Mercer Auto. No phone call, no confrontation, just the machinery of truth beginning to move. Later that day, Ron sent another message to the family group chat. He wrote, "The bank is wrong. We will fix this. Everyone stay calm." Patty followed with a line of prayer hands emojis, as if faith could erase invoices and broken trust. I did not respond. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a blanket, and watched the snowlight fill my apartment. Hours passed. My phone buzzed again this time with an unfamiliar number. I answered. A clerk from the small claims court spoke politely. "The notice has been delivered to the business address. Hearing will be scheduled in January." Ron had surely opened it by now. I imagined him reading the words, seeing the official stamp, realizing that this time there was no way to twist the story or hide it under the rug. He had laughed at a gift. He had taken what was not his. Now the world outside our family would see it. I went for a walk by the lake. The water was frozen and still. I watched a couple of geese standing near the edge, their feathers puffed against the cold. Something in the quiet felt like closure not loudly announced, just arriving on soft feet. When I got home, the family group chat was strangely silent. No new messages, no demands, no insults. Silence sometimes says more than any explosion ever could. Evening fell. The garage posted on its social media account that hours had been reduced temporarily due to supply constraints. Comments appeared from customers asking what happened. No one from the family responded. The next morning, Patty left a voicemail on my phone. Her voice was thin and trembling. She said, "We are under a lot of stress, dear. This is ruining our reputation. People are talking. Please help your family." I sat at my kitchen table and listened. She never said, "We are sorry." She never said, "We were wrong." Only, "Please help us escape the consequences of our choices." I did not call back. Instead, I printed copies of every document and placed them in a box. I labeled it Truth. That night, Melissa sent a message. She wrote softly, "This is the part where you stop carrying blame that is not yours." I closed my eyes and breathed. The next day, the IRS envelope was stuck in the garage door, again fluttering in the wind. Past due. Action required. Ron had not paid it. Maybe he could not. Maybe he still believed someone else would fix the mess. That evening, I drove past and saw the lights off again. The building looked tired and gray, like a house after a storm. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. The truth had walked on its own legs. On December 31st, I spent New Year's Eve quietly. No grand celebration, just a small fire in the fireplace, a bowl of soup and music low in the background. At midnight, I raised my glass to no one and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." The world outside was cold and quiet, but inside my heart was warm. I had not shouted or screamed. I had not thrown anything or demanded sympathy. I had chosen quiet justice, and quiet justice had answered. If quiet justice felt louder than shouting, say quiet. On January 1st, Patty hosted what she called a New Year family lunch and sent a group message filled with cheerful emojis and bright exclamation points, as if pixels could glue a broken house back together. I arrived because Aunt Leona asked me to, not because Patty's invitation meant anything. The dining room table was set with unused cloth napkins and silverware that gleamed too bright for a meal no one wanted. Plates of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes sat untouched. There were only 5 people instead of the usual 12. Chairs that once held loud uncles and laughing cousins sat empty, their silence louder than any argument. Patty wore a sweater in glittering gold that shimmered every time she forced a smile. She said everything is fine in a tone so high it barely hovered above desperation. But the empty chairs told the truth. People do not attend when the performance is exposed. Ron sat at the far end scrolling his phone. His jaw was clenched and his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He barely looked up when I entered. No one mentioned the video. No one dared bring up the bank. Patty pushed a bowl toward me and said, "Eat something, sweetie," as if food could fill the spaces that trust used to occupy. I sat quietly. I used to shrink in moments like this, trying to make peace, trying to smooth the surface of the water. Not anymore. Every person at the table ate slowly, avoiding eye contact, chewing like they did not taste anything. Halfway through the meal, Patty launched into a cheerful story about a neighbor's new puppy. Her voice cracked halfway through a sentence. She laughed too loudly at her own words. The room stayed frozen. After 10 minutes, Ron stood abruptly and left the table. The back door slammed. Patty blinked fast as tears welled up and she muttered, "Men are so emotional," while her voice trembled. I excused myself and stepped outside. Snow had melted into slush that soaked the gravel. Ron stood near his truck with his hands on his head. Several expensive tool cases were stacked in the bed of the truck, the kind he once bragged about when business was good. Now he was selling them. When he saw me, he looked away. There was no anger in his face anymore, only fear. He climbed into the truck and drove off without a word, tires skidding slightly on the wet pavement. I walked back inside. Patty pretended nothing happened. She passed a bowl of salad toward an empty chair as if a ghost might take it. No one ate the salad. By 2 o'clock, people began quietly gathering coats and murmuring thanks. There were no hugs at the door, no "see you soon," just silence that stretched to the car and down the snowy street. When the door closed, the house felt hollow. I left without saying goodbye. In the afternoon, I sat at Aunt Sandra's small kitchen table. She ladled hot vegetable soup into bowls and added crackers on the side. The house was warm and smelled faintly of thyme and fresh bread. She looked at me with soft eyes and said, "You must be exhausted." I told her I was more relieved than tired. We ate slowly. Unlike Patty's table, silence here felt peaceful. After we finished, Sandra reached into her purse and handed me a small folded note. She said, "I found this in your grandfather's desk before the lawyer came. It was addressed to me." His handwriting was steady and familiar. It said, "If they push her, she will rise higher than they ever expected. Respect is her inheritance." My throat tightened. Sandra placed her hand over mine. She said, "You did right. You showed grace when others showed greed." Later, when I returned to my apartment, I opened my banking app. For months, I had let Ron use a secondary card on my account because he claimed it helped with family expenses. He used it for tools, parts, meals, whatever crisis he declared. I canceled the card weeks ago, but there were recent charges I had not recognized. Tires, hydraulic fluid, and a catering bill from a holiday event he hosted to impress clients. He had charged it all to me. I filed chargebacks for every unauthorized purchase. The bank responded quickly. The account associated with Ron's name would be temporarily held until proof of authorization was provided. I imagined him swiping a card that suddenly declined, watching the cashier shake her head. Quiet consequences travel far. That evening, my phone buzzed with notifications. The catering company attempted payment again, but the transaction failed. A parts supplier tried to process an invoice, but the account was blocked. The messages came in a shrinking rhythm, each one marking another line of credit, turning to dust. Somewhere across town, Ron was realizing this time no one else would cover the hole he dug. The next morning, a neighbor of Patty's posted on social media asking if anyone knew why the garage was only accepting cash. Comments piled in, rumors spread. Customers complained that their repair appointments were canceled or rescheduled. Reputation once bruised does not heal with denial. In the afternoon, my phone vibrated with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. A voicemail appeared. It was Ron. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. He said the supplier cut off our discount. They only deliver tiny orders. We cannot buy enough parts to stay open. You have to fix this. You ruined us. I pressed delete. I looked around my apartment, the bookshelf my grandfather built, the quiet plants near the window, the clock that ticked steady and soft. I did not feel cruel. I felt safe. Setting boundaries feels like rebellion when a family is used to taking without asking. But boundaries are not violence. They are protection. 2 days later, a notification from my bank appeared. The investigation of the unauthorized charges was complete. Refunds had been issued. The secondary card was permanently banned from use. Ron's account was locked until he produced written authorization. There was none. I made tea and opened my curtains. The sunlight turned the snow outside into a soft mirror. Somewhere across Lakewood, Ron realized the doors he leaned on for years had quietly closed. He might blame me. He might blame the bank, but the truth was simple. He built a tower of favors and expected me to be the foundation. I finally stepped away. The tower shook on its own weak legs. If boundaries ever saved your peace, comment boundaries. On January 3rd, the night felt heavy with the kind of winter quiet that makes every sound ring louder than it should. I was sitting on my couch with a blanket over my legs and a mug of tea cooling on the table when someone knocked at my door. 3 slow knocks, hesitant, like the person behind them was unsure if they deserved to be there. I opened it and saw Ron standing in the hallway, his jacket damp with melted snow, his eyes exhausted, his shoulders slumped. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He finally said, "I need to talk." His voice was thin, trembling at the edges. I stepped aside just enough for him to enter. He stood in the middle of my living room, looking at the framed picture of my grandfather on the shelf. He swallowed hard and said, "I never meant to hurt you. I was protecting the family image." The sentence sat between us, fragile and dishonest. He had always cared more about how things looked than how they were. He rubbed his hands together and said, "We are in trouble at the garage. There is no credit. Suppliers are demanding cash. Customers are angry." He looked up at me with eyes that tried to be gentle. "I just need $25,000 as a bridge loan until Friday. I will pay it back, I promise." He used the same tone he used on customers, a soft, pleading voice meant to sound reasonable. I sat down and motioned for him to sit too. He stayed standing. I asked for a cash flow statement. He blinked. "A what?" I repeated cash flow. Income, expenses, outstanding invoices, loan balances. If it is a business problem, then it needs a business plan. He looked away. He said, "We do not have time for paperwork. We just need cash now. Then everything will go back to normal." That word normal felt like a door trying to close itself. I told him I could not consider anything without documents. He sighed loudly and ran a hand through his hair. He said, "You are making this harder than it needs to be. You owe us. We raised you." The words tasted bitter. I stood and walked to my desk. I opened a folder and pulled out a document I had prepared days earlier, a simple repayment agreement. It listed the education funds Patty and Ron had taken 8 years ago, the unauthorized charges on my card, and a repayment schedule at the minimum interest required by state law. If he signed it, I would withdraw the small claims case. If he did not sign it, the case would continue. I put the paper on the coffee table. He stared at it like it was a snake. He said, "You cannot be serious. This is just family money." I said, "No, family money is given with love. This was taken without consent." He raised his voice. "You are destroying us. You turned on your family." I said softly, "I am asking for accountability." He paced across the room, muttering that I had no idea how hard he worked, that he stayed up nights running the business, that Grandpa never understood pressure. Then he said something he should not have said. He said, "We used your fund to save the garage. We saved the family. Without that money, we would have shut down years ago." His voice was sharp, angry, unguarded. My phone rested on the table beside my tea. The voice recorder was already running quietly, legally, openly on the screen. He had walked right into the truth. I did not move. I did not celebrate. I only listened. He realized too late what he had admitted. His face tightened and he pointed a shaking finger at the agreement. "I will not sign anything. You want to take your own family to court. Fine, do it." He grabbed his coat and stormed toward the door. Before he left, he turned back and said, "You think this makes you strong? You think this makes you better than us?" My voice was calm. "No, it makes me free." He stared at me as if seeing someone he did not recognize. Then he slammed the door, and his footsteps disappeared down the hall. Silence filled my apartment. I picked up the paper and placed it back in the folder. I saved the audio file with a label called Truth. I sat on the couch and exhaled. There were moments in life when saying no felt like an explosion, but sometimes it felt like a whisper that changed everything. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Melissa. She asked if I was holding up. I told her that Ron had visited. I did not go into details. She wrote, "You do not need to justify your boundaries. They exist because you finally believe you deserve peace." I folded the blanket around me and looked out the window. Snow drifted in slow spirals under the street lamp. Somewhere in Lakewood, Ron was realizing that his words had consequences, that his secrets were no longer hidden. I thought about how many years I spent trying to earn respect from people who saw kindness as weakness. I used to believe that loyalty meant silence. Now I understood that silence only protected the wrong people. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the lake. The water was still frozen, but the sky was a soft shade of pink, like the world was trying to start over in small ways. My boots crunched over the icy path. I felt light, not because problems had disappeared, but because I had finally stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. When I went back to the apartment, there was a voicemail from Patty. She sounded frantic. She said Ron came home furious. He said you tricked him. You cornered him. Please, we can work something out. Just drop the case. Think of the family. I deleted the message. I brewed coffee and turned on the radio. A quiet song filled the room. I did not feel cruel. I felt whole. Saying no was not an attack. It was a promise to myself. That night, I placed the repayment draft, the receipts, and the audio file into a folder labeled January. I closed the drawer. I knew I would need them soon. The legal system moved slowly, but it moved. When the phone was silent again, I whispered to the empty room, "If no was the bravest word you ever said, type brave." On January 8th, Melissa called me into her office. The sky outside her window was a sheet of pale gray, and the sidewalks were covered with thin crusts of salt. She greeted me with a small nod, the kind that carries news without a headline. The small claims court had officially scheduled the first hearing. The date was printed in bold on the notice she slid across the desk. Ron would receive his copy soon. No more speculation, no more warnings. Now he would have to sit in a room built for truth rather than performance. Melissa went through the details. The supplier was still enforcing cash on delivery and would not reopen credit lines until the garage produced transparent records. The bank had confirmed the subtrust protection, and for the first year, distributions would be limited to income only. The principal would sit untouched, like a safe that only character could open. I signed the final documents. When we finished, Melissa leaned back in her chair and said, "You have done enough. You do not need to fight every battle. The system will do its work." I walked out of the office and into the cold January air. The city felt quiet but alive, like the world was breathing beneath the snow. I drove to the river and parked near the Cuyahoga. The water moved slowly under thin sheets of ice, dark and patient. I stood by the railing and listened to the small sounds of winter, the creak of ice, shifting the distant hum of traffic. I had never realized how heavy forgiveness could feel until I stopped offering it to people who only wanted to avoid consequences. That afternoon, I visited a small decor shop downtown. It was warm inside with shelves of handcrafted frames and paintings and little wooden signs carved with hopeful words. I brought in a quote my grandfather used to say, "Respect is currency." The shop owner printed it and set it into a dark walnut frame. I held it in my hands and felt its weight. This would hang where I could see it every morning, a reminder of who I wanted to be. When I reached my apartment, Patty had left a voicemail. Her voice was thin, almost brittle. She said, "Hope you are happy." The words were small and sharp. I did not listen to the rest. I hit delete. Happiness was not built on someone else's suffering. It was built on boundaries. A few days later, I took the framed quote and hung it above my desk. Beside it, I placed the old leather watch my grandfather had worn for decades. The winter sun poured through the window, and the light touched the metal with a soft glow. I sat in the quiet and closed my eyes. I did not win. I stopped losing myself. That was enough. On January 12th, an envelope slid under my door. It was official court mail. Inside was a notice of mediation. The court required Ron to attend a session before the hearing. He would have to sit across from a mediator from me, from the truth. No more jokes, no more performances in front of relatives, just facts. I imagined him opening his copy at the garage, feeling his world shrink from excuses to accountability. This was the escalation he never expected. A man who mocked the idea of consequences would now be required to face them. The next morning, I set out for a walk. The snow had softened and the sidewalks glistened. I stopped at a cafe and ordered a cup of coffee. At a nearby table, a group of older women laughed softly, sharing stories about their families. For a moment, I wondered if they had ever been laughed at, if they had ever been used for image or money. Perhaps they had learned the same lesson I had. Some people do not understand kindness until it costs them access. When I got home, I looked at the framed quote again. Respect is currency. I opened my laptop and continued working on a design project for a local bakery. The colors were warm tones of cream and copper, a quiet palette that felt like comfort. Hours passed and my phone stayed still. No one demanded anything. No one blamed me. Silence when it comes from peace rather than fear can feel like forgiveness. Later that evening, a resident in my building saw me in the hallway and said I seemed lighter lately. I smiled and realized she was right. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was bracing for impact. I had taken back my life inch by inch, not with shouting, not with cruelty, but with quiet justice and steady truth. The world outside my window was still cold, still full of challenges and disappointments, but I was not the girl begging to be believed anymore. I was the woman who stood up without apology. I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Grandpa." The clock on my desk ticked in soft, steady beats. The framed words glowed in the low light. Respect is currency. If quiet justice and silent revenge ever kept your dignity above money, share one line about emotional resilience truth, and closure standing up for yourself reclaiming respect. What lesson in betrayal did life teach you about justice without hate and revenge through truth?